Hello folks, fancy seeing you here. Thank you so much for joining me for our deep dive. This is the third session where we've been looking at the great works of the great composers, and today it's an opera day. We're going to be looking at Dido and Aeneas by Henry Purcell. To those of you that have just been singing with me on the classical and trad broadcast, I do hope you enjoyed learning that lovely movement from the middle of Dido and Aeneas. It's actually sung by the villains. It's sung by the witches. I'll be telling you much more about that in a minute. I just need to double check that everything's working before we start. So just let me check my presentation here. That looks okay. I'm not going to be using the pedal for this one. And let me just check I can hear these files here. So, yeah. Oh, marvellous. Good. Oh, just heavenly. Wonderful. So a very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our deep dive on Henry Purcell's beautiful Dido and Aeneas. And of course, deep dives are aimed at absolutely everyone. You don't have to be a musician. You don't have to be a specialist to get the most out of these. I do occasionally use musical terms, but I hope I always explain them for you. And really, I hope to sort of pull the curtain back a little bit on some of these amazing works, and we'll always look at least something from this style or by this composer on the channel as well. So Dido and Aeneas. Before I tell you about the opera, we're going to be listening to a number of lovely tracks from this great work. I'd love to know, those of you who are here in the comments, and particularly if you are here live, you know, who's sung this? Who knows this lovely piece? I'd love to know that. Oh, is everything working? Bet that pedal's long gone. Yeah, it's out the window, Glennis. Yes, do let me know, please, if you know this work. But if it's completely new to you, again, please do let me know. There is a very famous piece from this wonderful opera called When I Am Laid in Earth, which is sung by Queen Dido at the very end as she's dying. And it's an incredibly moving, very lovely piece of music. We'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But let me start by just welcoming you and telling you a little bit about the composer, Mr. Henry Purcell. Now, this is he. He is one of the great English composers. In fact, until Sir Edward Elgar came along, he was probably the greatest of all English composers. He was relatively short-lived. He only lived 34 years. And that's a number that really is unfortunately very typical for the great composers. Schubert, Mendelssohn, Mozart, Purcell, they all died in their early 30s of diseases that are today entirely preventable, but in those days were very much fatal. But in his short life, Purcell produced an astounding amount of music. He was one of these great prodigies showing huge musical promise from a very young age. He was born in 1659. He was born, in fact, in an area of London known as the Devil's Acre, which is in Old Pie Street around Westminster. And this was a notorious slum. Henry Purcell Sr., whose older brother Thomas Purcell was a musician, was a gentleman of the Chapel Royal. So that means he sang for the king and sang at the coronation of King Charles II. So this is, very important historically speaking. Now, Henry the Elder had three sons, Edward, Henry, and Daniel. Henry was the middle son. Daniel was also a prominent musician, Daniel Purcell. And in fact, after Henry Purcell's death, that is to say, this Henry, then Daniel finished a number of important pieces, including The Indian Queen, which is a lovely piece of music. The family lived just a few hundred yards from Westminster Abbey from 1659 onwards. So Henry Purcell, that is to say, Henry Purcell Jr., grew up in the shadow, effectively, of Westminster Abbey. Very important, as he was to become the organist at the Abbey and later to be buried there. Now, after Henry Purcell Jr.'s father's death in 1664, he was placed under the guardianship of his uncle Thomas, who showed him great kindness. And this is such a relief I think, after hearing of some of the awful childhoods of many of our favourite composers, Beethoven to name but one, Rachmaninoff from last week. Here Henry Purcell grew up, loved and cared for, and his uncle Thomas arranged for him to become a chorister at a very young age. And Henry studied first underneath Captain Henry Cook, who was a very important musician of the time, and then later under a composer called, get this, Pelham Humphrey. Wonderful name. They don't name them like that anymore. They certainly don't write music like Pelham Humphrey did. An incredible composer, hugely important, and many of Purcell's particular stylistic touches, fingerprints, came directly from learning from Pelham Humphrey. And really, Purcell grew up playing instruments, in particular the organ, and he was a chorister in the chapel royal till his voice broke, and he became assistant to an organ builder. And this particular organ builder held the post of Keeper of Wind Instruments to the King, which is quite a job title. Now, let's talk about Dido and Aeneas itself, because there's such a lot of lovely music to get through. I could spend a long time talking about Purcell's life and his huge influence on the world of composition. He actually wrote in many different styles. He was a hugely accomplished church composer, and you may well have sung quite a lot of his church music, his beautiful anthems. He wrote settings of I Was Glad and the Te Deum, as well as lovely pieces such as Remember Not, Lord, Our Offences, which we know, I Will Sing Unto the Lord, Oh Sing Unto the Lord, just dozens and dozens of lovely church pieces. He also wrote a lot of stage music. He wrote music for what were known as masques, and that's spelled Masques. And these were courtly entertainments where the nobility would put on masks and would enact these particular stories. Most of them were really, really gory and involved lots and lots of sex and violence and death. And this is how the nobles killed time whilst the peasants toiled and died outside of their houses. And a lot of these masques had special scores written for them. Purcell wrote a number of masques himself, and so, as I say, he was a prominent composer of stage music, and he also wrote interesting catches and rounds for the pub after the rehearsal, and we've sung one of them here on the channel, the very famous Pox on You for a Fop. Now, the thing about Dido and Aeneas is we don't know exactly when it was first performed. We have no record of it. There is no original score extant either. Nothing survived, but various copies survived. But we know that it was that the first performance would have taken place no later than the summer of 1688. It may have taken place earlier in 1687, but it's going to be around that time. And it's pretty clear from a letter from one of the associates of a girls' school, Josiah Priest's girls' school in Chelsea, that the first performance took place there. It was written effectively for a girls' school. And many of you may well have performed this when you were at school, if you went to a girls' school. And you can basically tell, because there's lots and lots and lots of parts for females to sing and only a couple of parts for males. You can imagine the history master being drafted in to sing the role of Aeneas, and some of the gruffer masters to sing the tenors and basses, whilst all the other parts were taken by the girls. Now, several scholars have argued that actually this was composed for King James II, perhaps even as a masque, but we don't know. All we know is that it has become famous for being performed at girls' schools, and we also know that after 1705 it disappeared entirely. It was not performed again until 1895. It was basically lost and ignored for nearly 2 centuries. It came back at the Royal College of Music to mark the bicentenary of Purcell's death. He died in 1695. It received its first performance outside England in Dublin. There we go, that cosmopolitan city, and we know full well how important that was to handle, but that was in 1895 as well. Interestingly, the scores that we have of Dido and Aeneas are very interesting. The scores that you might have had in the 1960s, for example, are very different from the modern scores that you find today. You'll find a lot of the harmonic features of Purcell's writing, the more colourful uses of harmony and of melody were sanitized, were rewritten, bowdlerized, if you like, because the arrangers would have thought, well, actually, he couldn't have meant that. That's far too dissonant. That wouldn't work. So they rewrote his lines in recent years, certainly since 1995, which is when I first really started to encounter Purcell's music. It hadn't been 300 years since his death. There has been a huge movement to perform Purcell's music using authentic instruments and very much referring to the scores that we have surviving. So let's talk about Dido and Aeneas. It's a hugely important landmark work. It is one of the most important English operas. It's very short. It's only about 45 minutes to listen to the whole thing. If you've never listened to it, I would thoroughly commend it to you. I'm going to tell you about the recording that I'm using today. It is my favourite recording of it, bar none. It's absolutely glorious. Interestingly, it is considered the first proper English opera. Now, there had been other operas written. Blow wrote Venus and Adonis, but this was mostly recitative, that is to say, sung speech with simple accompaniment. This is a stage work. Dido and Aeneas is a stage work with lead roles, with choruses, with duets, with recitatives. It is recognisably an opera. It is still very much performed today. It's up in the top 10 of operas performed worldwide. And it's not particularly difficult. Not to say it doesn't have challenging parts, but it's something that a choir can put on, invite some soloists in, and really enjoy. And it's not like putting on the Ring Cycle by Wagner, for example. Now, the story of Dido and Aeneas obviously derives from the original source in Virgil's epic, the Aeneid. And what we have here is a little bit of writing here, little flyer, an opera performed at Mr. Josiah Priest's boarding school at Chelsea by young gentlewomen. There you are. The words made by Mr. Nathan Tate, music composed by Mr. Henry Purcell. And so that is one of the earliest sources we have for the performance of Dido and Aeneas. Now, this is the recording that I'm going to be playing excerpts from. It is absolutely wonderful. It's directed by Andrew Parrott. It has Emily Van Evera as Dido and Ben Parry as Aeneas. And those of you who think, I recognise that name, a former swingle singer, and those of you who have signed up for the Beatles course on SIC will be hearing Ben Parry's voice. He is an amazing musician. And when I was lucky enough to sing Aeneas many years ago, nearly 20 years ago now, I had his voice as my inspiration. It's a glorious, glorious rendition in Baroque pitch. And let's talk about it. Let's have some of it. So it opens with an overture. And at this point, you might think, okay, that's fairly normal. Though in those days, it was still a developing art. But it opens with an overture in the French style. So we have a slow, dotted rhythm opening. Here it is. And you can hear the tragedy in these chords. Now, Purcell's writing is always really evocative and really very, very carefully planned. He is a master of drama. And you can hear the weeping and the mourning of the overture as it's about to recount the tale of this very, very tragic story. Now, what you hear in a moment is the second part of the French overture, which is a fugue, and it's unbelievably complicated. Have a listen to this. It's fast and furious. Here we go. This wonderful fiery fugue repeats, and it's almost as if this is the start of the day, servants bustling to set the scene for Queen Dido. Here's the repeat. Okay, absolutely beautiful, wonderful playing, of course, by the Taverner Choir here. Now, before we leap into the opera itself, let me tell you a little bit about Purcell's style and why he is so revered and why he's so important. What you're going to hear is operatic writing in its very, very early days. Remember that opera was really only invented in the late 16th century, very late, in fact, and the earliest operas we have are from 1600 by Monteverdi. And so this is only coming a few decades after the invention of the form. And Purcell has really taken on board all of the key features. So highly expressive writing. I've spoken many times on this and other channels. When you're writing expressively, you want wide leaps. When you're writing about grief, you use chromaticism. That is moving by semitone. Okay, and Purcell does that a lot here. He uses harmony in a way that serves the words and mood. So if we're talking about something sad, we'll get a minor chord. Something happy, you get a major chord. This is still very new. He uses suspensions, notes that are held against each other to create clashes that are really unusual, really striking, and particularly to our ears, which are used to the, I suppose, the later Baroque and classical and romantic uses of suspensions, which are very clearly laid out under rules developed under Bach and by Mozart and so on. This is Purcell writing very much in the style of the Renaissance, which didn't have these rules, and that's why they sound so daring and interesting. He makes use of something called ground bass, and ground bass is not a condiment. What this is a repeated pattern. We'll talk more about it in a minute. False relations. Those of you who have just been learning with me, apologies by the way for the siren, at least it's at Baroque pitch. Those of you that have just been learning in our deep vaulted cell will have heard a false relation. This is a very typical English feature. And of course, word painting. Those of you who studied with me on my Round Sound Messiah course, remember word painting is where you use melody and harmony to very much show what the words are meaning. Okay, so we'll talk about that as well in a moment. So what is a ground bass? Well, it's otherwise known as a basso ostinato, ostinato being a repeated figure, and it's a repeated bass line that's played over and over, and different melodies are played over it, and it just repeats, and the melody will adapt to the bass line. Okay, and he uses this feature a good half dozen times throughout Dido and Aeneas. What is the false relation? Well, it's not "you're not my uncle." It's a harmonic trick where the third of the chord that is the home chord of the key is played as a minor tone, but then almost immediately as a major tone when you arrive at a cadence. Now, I've got an example here. If you've sung Birds Ave Verum Corpus with me, you'll remember this. Yeah, listen again. So we got the third of the chord and then the minor. So we get that clash. It's really stark. It's really sharp to our ears, and yet it's absolutely wonderful. And the effect just casts a shadow over the following chords. And when it's properly prepared, as I've said here, it is absolutely glorious. And it's almost exclusively English. You will hear examples of it quoted. I heard some in John Williams once. There's a lovely one in Saving Private Ryan. But the English composers of the early Baroque used this a lot. And when you're listening to the music of Purcell and perhaps even to Pelham Humphrey, you'll hear loads and loads of false relations and so-called English cadences. So everyone, we start at the beginning. A good place to start. We have had the overture, and at the very start of Dido and Aeneas, the servant Belinda, Dido's beloved servant, is trying to rouse Dido from a huge depression. And here we have some incredible word painting here. She sings, "Shake the cloud from off your brow, fate no wishes does allow, empire growing, pleasures flowing, fortune smiles and so should you." And when she sings "shake the cloud," she sings "shake the cloud," so the note shakes. She also sings "and pleasures flowing," so there, flowing as water. And then when she sings "fortune smiles," she sings "fortune smiles and so should you," on that cadence there, indicating, you know, very much a definite sort of "and so should you," so there. So and then the chorus come in, echoing, basically trying to cheer up the Queen. Let's have a little listen to this. Here's Shake the Cloud. And now, here come the chorus to try and cheer her up. Smile. Sorrowful. Wonderful. And you hear that grief, that very, very typical use of chromaticism, falling lines. And at the very end, what chord are we? Yeah, see there. It's a bare fifth at the very, very end because it's unresolved. Now here Dido sings of her depression, of her malaise. Her darkness shades her. She's pressed with torment not to be confessed. She sings, peace and I are strangers grown. She is lonely. She is contemplating ending her life. And here we have our first ground bass. And you'll hear this sort of languishing sound. When she sings, I languish. You know, musically, it's so, so evocative and lovely use of word painting. Let's have a little bit of this. This is called Our Belinda. Is that bass repeating again? Absolutely beautiful. And these short phrases, she's sighing. And this ground bass just establishes this lovely, lovely thing. Lots of people have got to disappear. I'll see you later on. Hope you enjoy. Fabulous. Wonderful. I'll fade that one out. It's well worth listening to the whole thing. This recording is absolutely splendid. And then the chorus come in and try and help her because, of course, she's not on her own. The handsome prince Aeneas has sailed in and wants to come and woo her. And Belinda says, well, see, here is this lovely prince come to woo you. Cheer up, you know, it might never happen. And then the chorus sings this lovely line, Cupid only draws the dart. Here we go. Lovely suspensions. Again, a bare fifth at the end. A lot of these choruses end without a third major or minor because it's so unresolved what's going to happen. Well, the Queen and Aeneas fall in love, and there is a joyous celebration at the end of Act 1 as everyone is delighted. They're going to get married. All's going to be well. But this is an opera, so it's not all going to go very well. We move to Act 2, which opens with a coven of evil witches who are plotting Dido's downfall. Here is the start of their track here. Listen to all this chromaticism. And again. And on this recording, interestingly, the sorceress is played by a man. It's an absolutely brilliant bit of casting. He does it really, really well. Usually it's sung by a woman up in soprano register, but here it's sung by a tenor, which gives her some real heft. And here you get this: wayward sisters, you that fright the lowly traveller by night. So here, the sorceress is commanding her witches to interfere with the love of Queen Dido. She wants Carthage ruined. She wants everything destroyed. And so they decide to break up the lovers. And so what they do is they send a storm to interrupt them. They're out cavorting in the fields. And so they send a storm. And what you get is some wonderful little choruses from the witches, including some really short ones where they laugh evilly. Here is a 9-second chorus called Ho Ho Ho. Here we go. And that's it. It's a tiny, tiny chorus. You get several of those. You then get In Our Deep Vaulted Cell, which we learned earlier on. And what happens is they send this storm to make everyone run back to town. And what you get is this haste, haste to town, okay, that Queen Dido sings. Actually, it's Belinda, sorry, who sings haste, haste to town as everyone gathers up their stuff and they all run back. This open field, no shelter from the storm. And then the chorus echo her. There we are. Now everyone gathers their stuff and all head back to town, but Prince Aeneas is called by what he thinks is a spirit of Mercury, with command from Jove to leave Dido and sail home at once. Now, bearing in mind this isn't actually a servant of Mercury, this is one of the witches disguised, but he falls for it entirely. Tonight. The angry god will brook no longer stay. So basically, Jove commands him, he thinks, to leave Dido. He says he will obey the gods, but realizes this means leaving his love. He breaks down in despair, and that's the end of the second act. Now, the third act, ladies and gentlemen, opens with an amazingly fun, bright chorus. Come away, fellow sailors, come away. And these sailors are singing of having to leave and take a boozy short leave of your nymphs on the shore and silence their mourning with vows of returning, though never intending to visit them more. Basically, it's everything that is wrong about sailors. And what I love about this particular performance is that they sing it with a rather rough accent. I've heard it sung with lovely sort of British RP accents, but, you know, these are rough sailors. And so let's have a little listen to the sailors here, conducted by Mr. Parrott. And you can see here This is a little representation of Troy leaving, and a little idea what's happened to Queen Dido. Here we go. There we go. And the chorus then responds. It's really well worth listening to this lovely recording. I do like, no, limps on the shore, silence their mourning with vows of returning. Well, at this point, Aeneas has to go and break the news to Dido that he's been compelled to leave. There is a huge argument. And in fact, during the argument, he changed his mind. He says, whatever the gods say, I'm going to stay. And Dido says, no, leave. You have the thought of leaving me. Just the thought of leaving me is enough to say that you're false. Go. No, I'll stay. Away, away. No, I'll stay. Away, away. And he leaves, broken. Dido commits suicide. As she's dying, she sings When I Am Laid in Earth. This is one of the most beautiful and incredibly sad and affecting pieces of music in the entire repertoire. The ground bass starts. It's a sinking chromatic line. And she sings over the top. And these are short phrases because she's dying. And this is just, for me, it's the most perfect performance of it. Absolutely wonderful. And then the chorus, as she dies, as she slips away, singing, remember me, but forget my fate. As she dies, the chorus sing, with drooping wings, ye cupids come. And the opera closes with this wonderful and very, very tragic and beautiful piece of writing. So much use of chromaticism, descending lines, moving down in semitones to indicate everyone's grief, everyone's mourning. And what's fascinating about with with Drooping Wings is that it uses every single note of the chromatic scale from G to G. Very, very unusual. This is Purcell throwing all of his tricks and all of his devices at this. Here's a bit of With Drooping Wings. To scatter roses on her tomb. And that's where Purcell leaves us, absolutely devastated, charmed with some of the most exquisite writing, and really full of grief for this poor woman scorned, this poor man tricked, and by these evil witches manipulating everyone in the middle. It's a perfect opera. And if you haven't ever heard it before, well, I do hope you've enjoyed today's deep dive. I'd love to just press play and play the whole thing to you, but you're all busy people, so I need to let you go. But if you've enjoyed it and you've never heard it before, please do watch that. Listen to. I'm going to scroll back. Please listen to this entire recording. You can find it on all the streaming services. Buy the CD. It's well worth it. I wore out 2 copies of this CD when I was in my late teens and early 20s. I am just obsessed with it. The sound of the Baroque playing is glorious. It's the Taverner Choir and Players with Andrew Parrott at the harpsichord. Now, everyone, I hope you've enjoyed it. Sad story that it is, though, as Bugs Bunny memorably said, what do you expect in an opera? A happy ending. Now, I'll see you on Friday for some happiness, ladies and gentlemen, for Fun Friday. We're going to have a great time. If you're in SIC, of course, I'm going to be with the basses, teaching them some opera, more tragedy, more death, more love. Really, it's life, ladies and gentlemen. Opera is the story of life. So I do hope you've enjoyed our little tale today. And if you liked it, please do hit the like button. Please tell your friends about our deep dives in particular. You don't have to sing. You just have to enjoy music. And I'm here every week sharing my passion, which is education, music teaching for all. So I'll see you very soon, ladies and gentlemen. Take care. Bye-bye.